After the most disappointing season in New York Rangers franchise history, Chris Drury has been given a multiple-year extension. Why?
You're Locked on the New York Rangers, your daily podcast on the New York Rangers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, Blue Shirts fans, to episode number 1297 of the Locked On New York Rangers podcast. I'm your host, John Chick. Just want to thank you guys, as always, for making Locked On New York Rangers your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. And today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off of your first purchase. And we are, of course, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So yes, breaking news yesterday that the Rangers and Chris Drury have come to an agreement on a multiple-year extension for him to remain in his position as the Rangers general manager. How many years? We don't know. I mean, at least none of the stories that I've seen have the exact number of years listed in them. But, you know, I'm sure that'll eventually get out there and we'll have some kind of an idea of how long of a contract that this is here. And of course, we'll get into some of the details of the contract, some of the quotes from Chris Drury and James Dolan on the matter. But I want to kick off today's episode with just a very honest, very raw reaction, kind of a knee-jerk reaction here to finding out this news that indeed Chris Drury was getting extended. And my first question, and I think a lot of you might have the same one, or at least one of the questions that you might have about this entire situation. How and why is this happening right now of all times? The timing of this is just really strange. We just got done watching an absolute farce of a New York Rangers season, an absolutely disgraceful performance from top to bottom. Everybody involved, from ownership to general managership to coaching to the players, everything was basically just terrible. And what I would say probably the most disappointing season in Ranger franchise history. And I know this team's been around for a long time, right? Longer than any of us. We've got the Centennial coming next year, season number 100. Let's hope it goes a little bit better than season 99. I think at the very least, that would certainly be a good thing. That'd be a good place to start. And there might be some people that hear that and say, oh, come on, the most disappointing season ever. Are we sure about that? No, I'm not 100% sure about that because I didn't live through the vast majority of Rangers seasons. But you tell me what's worse than this. This is a team coming into the season that was coming off an excellent year, President's Trophy, Eastern Conference Final appearance, a team that largely returned the exact same roster as the year before. The expectations were sky high. A lot of us were hoping the Rangers would get back to where they were last year and then some, and maybe even make a run at this thing. You know, I think, you know, coming into the season, certainly the goal for this Ranger team had to be a Stanley Cup championship. I mean, why would you aim for anything less than that when you came so close to achieving that last season? And it obviously didn't happen. And as far as it being, you know, the most disappointing, I do think it is. You know, some of those teams from the late 90s, early 2000s, they might give this past season a run for their money. But to me, this was worse because, again, the expectations were so sky high. In the 90s and 2000s, it almost became expected at a certain point, and there were question marks about some of the moves that they had made. There was no reason that things should have fallen apart this quickly. And not all of that is on Chris Drury, of course, but some of it for sure is. Like I said, everybody has a hand in this, and he's got to own his part of what I consider to be, yes, the most disappointing season in Ranger franchise history. And you've got Drury, who I think the worst portion of his tenure as Ranger general manager has been the most recent portion of it. The time frame that I've gone with multiple times on here, pretty much whenever we talk about Chris Drury, is about the last year and a half during his tenure as the Ranger GM. The last year in particular. I think we can probably even just narrow it down to the last year specifically. Nothing he's done has really gone right. None of the moves that he's made have really paid any kind of dividends. Some of them have backfired. Some of them are kind of ongoing storylines, but some of them don't look like they're going to work out the way that the Rangers and all of us and Chris Drury would probably like them to. I mean, you can start, you know, really going through the last calendar year here with Drury as the general manager. I think his first big blunder was last year's trade deadline. I understand there were salary cap concerns and whatnot, and there was only so much that he could do. But I'm sorry, when you've got a team that has the best record in the NHL, you have to do better at the trade deadline than Jack Roslovic, Alex Winberg, and Chad Ruhwedel. Those were the moves. Those were the guys that were going to come in and really push this thing over the finish line. And obviously, it didn't really work. Then you fast forward to the offseason and his just utter fumbling of the Jacob Trouba situation. Now, I was not against the idea of Jacob Trouba being traded. In fact, I was for it. I just didn't think he was good enough last season, particularly in the playoffs, and I was ready to move on. And if you can get somebody to take that contract, then by all means do it. But that report leaks that they're going to move on, and there's a deal in place with Detroit and all this other stuff. The decision has been made, and then they kind of backpedal on it, and Trouba stays around, and then they end up trading him anyway, 20 or 30 games into the season, whatever it was. So you allowed that situation to kind of just linger and fester, and then you ended up, moving on from him anyway. I don't think he handled that very well. You had the memo going out, and that didn't work at all. I mean, I feel like the reason why that memo leaked, or why Drury allowed it to leak, why he made it such public knowledge that the Rangers were looking for a shakeup, I get the feeling, first of all, there was probably some truth to it, and obviously they ended up making a bunch of deals after that memo went out. But I feel like the other big motive there was to kind of light a fire under these guys a little bit, give them a little bit of a kick and get them going. And obviously it backfired. I mean, again, you can't put everything on Drury because the players, they need to adult up and go out there and play hockey and do their jobs and stop worrying so much about what the front office is doing. But the bottom line, however much blame you want to put on the players, however much blame you want to put on Drury, we have to agree that memo, that did not go very well for this team. So that was a swing and a miss. You look at the extensions that he gave out last year. The Lafreniere extension all of a sudden is looking shaky at best. I can't do revisionist history on here because when it happened, I was in favor of that. I thought that was a good move. I thought it was a reasonable price for both sides. And I felt like the longer you waited to get a deal done with Lafreniere, the more that it would end up costing you in the long term. And that may well have been the case. Maybe Lafreniere would have, kept his foot on the gas because, he signs that contract and then his game falls off of a cliff. So, again, I was for it when it happened. I thought it was a good move. But the bottom line is we're looking at this situation now, and it's like, I'm not so sure about that. 7 years for Lafreniere at $7 million or $7.5 million, whatever the contract turned out to be. It's not cheap. And Lafreniere did not play like a player who had signed a contract for that length and that amount of money, once that contract had been signed. You've got the Igor extension. Look, I'm happy Igor Shesterkin is still here. But Drury, I feel like, and I said this at the time, kind of bid against himself. Because if you look at most of the other elite goalies in the league, they're all around like $8.5 million, $8 million, maybe a couple at $9 million. Bobrovsky, I know, is $10 million. But there was no reason to overshoot it by that much when I think you maybe could have played a little bit more hardball with Igor Shesterkin. Now, maybe Drury felt like he had to get a deal done so that didn't linger as well. He didn't want to take a chance of losing Igor in free agency, but I feel like he overplayed his hand there. $11.5 million plus the full no-move clause. That seems a little bit excessive. And so it just really wasn't a good, last year or so for Chris Drury. And this is the timing now. After all these things happen, and we didn't even discuss all the different questionable trades that he made, but it has not been a banner 12 months or so for Chris Drury. And this is the time where they decide to essentially reward him with a contract extension. And I don't get it. Chris Drury being here for this upcoming season, I fully expected that. I would have told you at the end of this season, if anybody would have asked me, what are the percentages that Drury comes back next season? I would have said probably like 95% because I just didn't feel like he was going to get fired. And on top of that, you've got a situation now where the Rangers are retooling this roster. And that began in the middle of last season with the trade of Jacob Trouba, with the trade of guys like Capo Caco, Philip Hedl, Ryan Lindgren. You could throw Jimmy Vesey in there too. They were retooling this roster on the fly. So Drury had already kind of begun to undertake this project of retooling rather than doing a full-fledged teardown rebuild, and that's already underway. So that being the case, and the fact that he was allowed to make all those deals, it always led me to believe that Drury would be back for at least one more year next season. So I'm not like that upset about Drury being back next year. I mean, if he had been fired, I wouldn't have shed a tear about that either. But one more year, I was okay with that, given the fact that Drury has done some good things in the past. But the extension is where the Rangers really start to lose me a little bit because, what has he done? We just went through the entire laundry list of mistakes, not to mention the on-ice product, and just the fact that nothing he's done recently seems to be working. And again, you now reward him with this multiple-year extension. It's just kind of bizarre timing. And, again, there's part of me that would have liked to have moved on from Chris Drury this offseason. And there's part of me also that wonders how many different coaches is this guy going to be allowed to hire? A lot of people are saying he's hired 4 head coaches now, with the next coach being the 4th. I mean, by my count, it's 3. I know he was here when David Quinn was the coach, but he wasn't the general manager. He was an assistant GM at that time. So he'll be on his 3rd coach in 4 years. And how many more does he get? I mean, is this the make or break? You know, it was a nightmare disaster of a season this past year, and everybody had a hand in that. Everybody bears responsibility for that, and that includes Chris Drury. This is the kind of season that the Rangers just had that cost people their jobs. Ask Peter Laviolette and Phil Housley about that. Or at the very least, if it doesn't cost you your job, it at least puts you squarely on the hot seat. And it's possible that despite this extension, Chris Drury still could be on the hot seat or at least the warm seat. I mean, I get the feeling that Dolan is going to be watching this team very carefully this upcoming season. He's got to see some kind of an improvement from this retooled roster that Drury is likely to employ next season. But I don't know. I mean, this contract extension, even though it's not ironclad, even though the Rangers could still, in theory, fire Chris Drury whenever, it does seem to be at least something of a vote of confidence from the Rangers in Chris Drury. And I'm just not sure after the season that they just had that this is the time for it, that his performance in the last year, year and a half, however far you want to go back, warrants a contract extension. That's just kind of where I stand with things. We're going to keep going on this. We're talking about the comments made by Chris Drury regarding the extension, James Dolan as well. And we'll also end today's episode by talking about some of the good that Chris Drury has done and kind of just wonder if anything good comes out of this situation, this contract extension for Chris Drury. And we'll get to all that in just a second. All right, we just want to take a minute to let everybody know that today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by Amazon Fire TV. Did you know your Fire TV is also an Xbox? Turn any TV into your gaming and entertainment hub with Fire TV Stick 4K devices. No console required. Just grab your paired controller, subscribe, or sign in to Xbox Game Pass Ultimate with EA Play included, and you are ready to play. Dive into hundreds of premium titles from EA Sports College Football 25 to Call of Duty Black Ops 6 and Avowed as easily as you stream your favorite TV shows. It's gaming made simple, and it's all on your Fire TV. You've got the latest technology for elevated playing. With Wi-Fi 6/6E and auto low latency mode advanced technology, Fire TV Stick 4K delivers smoother, more responsive gameplay with lightning fast speeds that you need to stay competitive. You've got endless entertainment with 4K streaming. Watch more than 1.5 million movies and TV episodes from your favorite subscribe services like Netflix, Prime Video, Disney Plus, Max, and more. Head to Amazon.com/Fire TV Locked On to get started. Xbox Game Pass Ultimate subscription and compatible controller required. Available on select devices, including Fire TV Stick 4K 2nd Gen, Fire TV Stick 4K Max 1st and 2nd Gen, and Fire TV Cube 3rd Gen. All right, let's go keep everything rolling here on Locked On New York Rangers. Huge shout out to the everydayers as always. In our next episode, we're actually going to do this today, but then we got this breaking news that Chris Drury was going to, stay on, get this multiple-year extension with the Rangers. So we're going to push this episode back a day. That's going to be part 2 of Breakup Day. There were some other talking points coming out of that entire event, and we've still yet to talk about them, so we'll definitely get to that in the next episode. But right now, let's go ahead and shift our attention to Chris Drury, James Dolan, the comments that they made regarding this multiple-year extension for Chris Drury. And we'll start with Drury himself. This is what he had to say about it. This was in the press release that the Rangers put out the other day. I am honored to sign this contract extension and continue in this position with the team I grew up supporting. As I said, when I began in this role nearly 4 years ago, there isn't a more special organization in hockey. And I look forward to continuing our work this offseason to help us reach our goals for next season and in the coming years. So, I mean, it's typical just kind of GM press release speak here. There's nothing really to dig into too far. But, there are some people that are in favor of this move, in favor of this contract extension. I certainly want to acknowledge them as well. One of the big talking points that I think a lot of the pro-Drury people have kind of thrown out there recently is his record. His record as Ranger general manager. 193 wins, 105 losses, 30 overtime losses in 328 regular season games. A stat that people are really throwing around quite a bit right now, at least those that like Chris Drury and would like to see him continue in the role that he's in right now, is the very simple fact that the Rangers have won 193 games in Drury's 4 years as the general manager of this team. And that is the most wins that any general manager has ever had in any 4-year span in franchise history. So there is something to be said for that, I think, for sure. Also, last year, the Rangers they set a new record in franchise wins with 55. So it's not like this team has been an utter disaster under Chris Drury. I think this last season, it's fair to label that as another disaster, but I can at least understand the viewpoint from some people that, want Chris Drury to stick around. And like I said, I was mostly okay with him coming back for one more season next year. But the idea of an extension, the idea that you're going to reward somebody after this, basically disaster piece of a season that the Rangers just had, can't quite wrap my head around that one. And I realize he could still be fired. We'll elaborate on that in just a little bit here. But here's a quote from James Dolan about the, obviously the contract extension for Chris Drury. I am pleased that Chris will continue to lead the Rangers hockey operations in his role as president and general manager. Over his tenure, Chris has shown passion for the Rangers, relentless work ethic, and a tireless pursuit of excellence. While we are all disappointed in what transpired this past season, I am confident in his ability to guide this organization to success. One question that I have, and again, some of you might have this one as well, what exactly has Chris Drury done to earn so much trust and so much patience from James Dolan? Because he's not really known for being all that patient, and yet he seems completely content with Chris Drury staying on as the general manager and the team team president. And, again, the point that I made just a second ago, and I think it makes sense to repeat it here, is the simple fact that the Rangers have won under Chris Drury. You could argue that Drury inherited a lot of the roster from the Jeff Gorton JD era, and I think that's certainly fair to bring up that point. It's somewhat true. What's also true, though, is like I said, he had 3 straight 100-point seasons in a row in his first 3 seasons as the Ranger GM, 2 years in the conference final. I mean, that does have to count for something. But again, it's strange to me that we saw Dolan, fire Jeff Gorton and JD in such a knee-jerk reaction to them basically not getting on board with the whole letter that went out about the Tom Wilson thing and everything that happened there. The 2 of them are fired and they're out the door, and just like that, the blink of an eye. And we all thought that overall the rebuild was mostly going pretty well and that those 2 would get to see it through until the end. Obviously, that didn't end up happening. So why fire them, but Chris Drury gets this contract extension? It just doesn't, the 2 things don't really equate. And again, I guess the one thing you can fall back on if you're pro Drury sticking around, which obviously Dolan is, and he's the only one whose vote really matters. But I guess the one thing is the track record before this season. There were 3, really strong seasons in a row there. And the point I made before, I touched on it for just a second, and I'll throw it out there now as well. It's not like Drury can't be fired after this upcoming season. It's not like, when you sign a GM to a contract extension, that it's ironclad and he's locked in as the Ranger GM for however many years this contract goes. We've seen other Rangers, personnel be fired when they're still under contract. Gerard Gallant still had years left on his contract when he was fired. Same thing with Peter Laviolette. With Laviolette, I'm trying to think. I think it might have just been a 3-year deal that he signed with the Rangers. So it's just one more year here that he's under contract and will get paid. So that could happen with Drury as well. But again, when you sign this extension, it does kind of come off as like a vote of confidence. And I mean, hey, if Dolan believes in Drury, then Dolan believes in Drury. Again, there's not really a whole lot that we can do about it. I saw somebody else say, I thought this was kind of interesting. There was a comment, I don't even know if they were responding to something that I had posted or if I saw it somewhere else, but somebody said something like, well, Drury, you had to either fire him or extend him. No, you didn't. No, you didn't. You could have very easily just let him go into this upcoming season on, just play out one more year and see how everything goes. It's different from dealing with a player, because with players, you can understand that argument. You can understand, trying to sign somebody to a contract extension before their contract comes due, because you get them before they hit unrestricted free agency. And in theory, you can also sign them for a little bit less than you might have been able to sign them for, if you had waited. So, I can't act like I'm really all that surprised about this, but the difference there is that this is a general manager. There's no salary cap to worry about. It's not like, by extending Chris Drury now, you can't sign a certain player that you want. Those 2 things don't have anything to do with each other. So, no, you didn't really have to go to one extreme or the other, I don't think. But again, Drury seems to have really gained the trust of James Dolan, really gained the patience of James Dolan. That's not an easy thing to do. So we'll see how it goes. We'll keep our fingers crossed, and hopefully Drury can retool this roster on the fly, which is obviously what it looks like he's attempting to do. But in just a second, we're going to keep everything rolling. We are going to switch our attention to maybe some of the positives that come out of this. We try to be glass half full on this podcast as much as we can. As I've mentioned previously, certainly the Rangers made that difficult this past season, but as I've mentioned before, it's not like Drury's never done anything good in his tenure as the Ranger general manager. Those are the people that lose me too on the other side of the coin when they say like, oh, he's the worst general manager in sports history. He's clearly not. He's clearly done some good things. And there could be some good things that come out of this. I got at least a few in mind. Maybe you guys do as well. Let me know if you do. Let me know your thoughts in general on this Chris Drury contract extension. Go ahead and leave them in the YouTube comment section. And like I said, in just a second, we'll try to look at some of the positives from this extension as well. All right, we just want to take a minute to let everybody know that today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by Gametime. Stanley Cup playoffs are here, and if you've never been to a live NHL playoff game, it is unlike anything else. The intensity, the speed, the energy in the building, it's next level. And thanks to Gametime, getting in the door is easier and more affordable than ever. Gametime is the fastest way to grab playoff tickets, even for those must-see matchups. Prices actually drop as puck drop gets closer, and with last-minute deals, you can save up to 60%. You've got last-minute deals. Save up to 60% off buying last minute for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, etc. Their all-in pricing shows the total cost up front with none of those surprise fees at checkout. The app even shows you panoramic seat views so you know exactly what you're getting before you buy. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. All right, let's go ahead and keep everything rolling here on Locked On New York Rangers. Figure we can close out today's episode by talking a little bit about, the good, the positive that comes out of this, because if you dig deep enough, there are some good things here. Some of them are a little bit on the humorous side. Some of them, though, I mean, they're he has legitimately done some good things. So we'll acknowledge that as well. Going to try to find the positives here. For one, I know there's a lot of Ranger fans out there who would like to see Mika Zibanejad get traded. I don't think it's going to happen for a lot of different reasons. We talked about Mika. We're actually going to be discussing him in the next episode. Looking forward to doing that. He had some interesting quotes on breakup day for the Rangers. But if you want Mika gone, the fact that Chris Drury is still here, maybe that makes it happen, because there doesn't seem to be any love lost between the players, at least some of the players, and Chris Drury. Mika's out there talking about how communication needs to be improved, as if the general manager of the Rangers needs to check in with him personally before he makes a trade. But I don't know what's going to happen. It could get very ugly between the Rangers and Mika Zibanejad. I'm still very skeptical that Mika Zibanejad is not on this Ranger roster on opening night next year, because, again, he's got the full no-move clause. It's his every right to use that if he would like to. And on top of that, even if he was in any way willing to budge or accept a trade to this team or that team, I just don't know how many teams are looking to trade for Mika Zibanejad, who has 5 years at $8.5 million per season left on his contract. But I do honestly believe that Chris Drury still being here makes it at least somewhat more likely that Mika gets traded, because Mika doesn't like Drury, or at least that appears to be the case. And Drury's known for playing hardball. So we'll see what he's got up his sleeve. I mean, you don't want him to go too far and make this locker room even worse than it already is right now. But Drury, I mean, he'll try. He will leave no stone unturned when it comes to trading Mika Zibanejad, if that's his goal for this offseason. I think we do know that. If you want Chris Kreider traded, I think it's probably going to happen. I feel like if there was another general manager that came in and took over now, that might be a little bit less likely to happen, just because, clean slate. And if there's a new GM, him and Kreider don't know each other all that well. And again, there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of love lost from Kreider to Drury. So that being the case, Drury might be more willing to move on from Kreider than a different GM might be. So if you want Kreider gone, I think there's a pretty good chance you're going to get your wish this upcoming offseason here. Something else that we mentioned in a recent episode, we brought up the idea that it was something that I was afraid of, that Chris Drury might overplay his hand in this upcoming season. Because if you're a general manager and you feel like you're really on the hot seat and you really have to do something drastic to save your job, then it could result in the general manager doing something, say, around the trade deadline that maybe they shouldn't do. Like maybe the Rangers are a fringe playoff team next year and the trade deadline is approaching, and Drury, knowing that he's trying to save his job, sells off all these prospects and all these draft picks and all these assets to bring in a couple of rentals just to try to push them over the finish line and barely eat their way into the playoffs. That would not be good business. The fact that Drury now has this multiple year contract extension, maybe that means he's got a little bit more job security, and maybe that means that he's less likely to do something that rash and that dramatic and that, frankly, reckless at the trade deadline this upcoming season. So there's that to think about as well. Somebody that thinks they have job security, there won't be quite as much heat on them, to win this season and make a deep run this upcoming season. I mean, hopefully the Rangers are a really good team next year, and hopefully they get to the trade deadline and they're clearly in position to buy, and that's all well and good. If that's the case, then by all means. But what I didn't want to have happen is for them to be a fringe playoff team or the outside of the playoff picture looking in, and them just going nuts at the trade deadline because Chris Drury's in there trying to save his job. The fact that he now has this extension, I feel like that scenario becomes at least somewhat less likely. Another thing, this might be my favorite, as far as like the good to come out of this, the positives to come out of this Chris Drury extension. To me, this sends a very clear message to the New York Ranger players that you do not run this team. If you're tired of listening to players whine about the need for better communication from the front office, or whining about trades that the team makes, or getting down in the dumps because they made this trade or waived that guy or whatever it might be, then this move to keep Chris Drury in his position, to me, that sends a very clear-cut, decisive message to these Ranger players. You do not run this team. We don't owe you anything. Your job is to go out there and play hockey. We don't have to get your approval when it comes to trading this player, waiving that player, calling this player up from the AHL, sending that player down to the AHL, whatever the situation might be. And I like that because, I mean, look, these players, I don't know if it's quite this black and white, but something that I've thrown out there and something that a lot of, I think you have thrown out there as well, is these players have essentially gotten a whole bunch of coaches fired. They didn't want to play for Quinn. After 2 years of Gallant, they didn't want to play for him. And if you watch them this past season, certainly didn't look like they wanted to play for Peter Laviolette anymore either. So how many coaches does this core group of players get to fire, essentially? The effort was very much lacking this past season. It was somewhat lacking in year 2 with Gerard Gallant, and nobody seemed to like David Quinn either. Nobody went to bat for David Quinn at the end of that season. Nobody went to bat for Gerard Gallant during breakup day at the end of that season, his second year there. So the Rangers have already pulled this nonsense, the Ranger players, and they've gotten coaches fired. Hey, at least it sends them a message that, if nothing else, you don't get to get the GMs fired. You don't get to get, front office members fired. Now, if you want Drury fired, I'll certainly hear you out on that. I don't think it would have been completely unfair if that would have happened this offseason. But the bottom line is it's not happening. And the other thing that's very important is the players don't get to make that decision. That's not them. You don't get a seat at that table. Your job is to play hockey and win hockey games, not to get the GM fired or the coach fired or anything like that. So that to me might be the biggest positive coming out of this, is it sends a message to the players. This is what we're doing. He's still here. Get on board or get off. Make your decision. One other positive that comes out of this, and I don't know if this one really necessarily is because of Drury as much as it's maybe a little bit of a random coincidence, but one thing that Drury seems to be able to do is he's very good at finding a coach who will have success in his first season on the job. Again, going back to David Quinn, we're not counting that because, yes, Chris Drury was in the room, but he was not the general manager there. So I don't really consider Quinn to be a Chris Drury hire, even though maybe he had a little bit of a voice in the matter. But he hires Gerard Gallant. Rangers are still rebuilding at the time, or so we think. They end up in the Eastern Conference Final, exceeding all expectations that were had for that season. I was very hopeful the Rangers would make the playoffs. They did that and then some in Gallant's first year. So a lot of success year 1 under Gallant, and really even more success year 1 under Peter Laviolette. He comes in here. Rangers were coming off a brutal showing in the playoffs the year before, that loss against the Devils. And Peter Laviolette comes in here, rights the ship, leads them to the best record in the NHL, the Eastern Conference Final, all that good stuff. And then everything falls apart in year 2. But it does seem like whenever Chris Drury hires a coach, there's a lot of success to be had in year 1. Now, again, is that just kind of coincidence? Maybe, but we got to be hopeful. We got to be optimistic about at least something. So hopefully Drury can go out there. I mean, ideally, he can go out there and find a coach that can be here for longer than like 2 seasons, and this team can enjoy sustained success in that time. But if nothing else, it does seem like the coach that he hires comes in here and has immediate success. So we'll keep our fingers crossed that Drury can go 3 for 3 in that department for this upcoming season. And again, hopefully beyond this upcoming season as well. One more thing that I'll throw out there, and this is not universal, but for the most part, I feel like Drury seems to do a pretty good job when it comes to trade negotiations. When the Rangers have struck a trade during Drury's 4 years as general manager, Very rarely have I looked at it and thought like, man, that's unreasonable. That we gave up way too much to bring in this player, or whatever the case might be. You look at some of the things he's done. I think to me, his best work, and I've said this before, is the trade deadline that he had during Gerard Gallant's first season. He brings in Vetrano, Kopp, Mott, and Braun. And all those guys played very key roles for this New York Ranger team. All of them seemed to fit in very seamlessly and made a difference, made a positive difference for this team. But I don't think he gave up too much for any of those guys. I mean, Kopp was maybe a little bit much, but Kopp came in here and played excellent hockey for the Rangers. You look at the Patrick Kane trade, the Vladimir Tarasenko trade. Yeah, they didn't really work out, but he at least went for it, and he brought in, these big name players and did so without giving up a whole heck of a lot to acquire them. You look at even the JT Miller trade from this past season. I know there's some people that have some mixed thoughts on that, and JT Miller's getting older, and he's got this long contract. It's an expensive contract. He's also a top 20 player in the NHL, when everything is going right. And he did make an impact on the Rangers, and the Rangers needed a player like that. They needed a player like JT Miller in the worst kind of way. So he did that without giving up a whole heck of a lot either. I know, Philip Hedl, we all like Hedl. Victor Mancini is a promising defenseman. And they also gave up the first rounder, but that's the going rate for a player like JT Miller. And I think, honestly, they probably got him on a little bit of a discount. Obviously, that's helped along by the fact that JT Miller only wanted to go to the Rangers, but he still made it done. And he's made all these trades without ever having to give up like a big-time prospect or somebody important. The Canucks really wanted Braden Schneider in that JT Miller trade. Drury wouldn't budge on that. He did a nice job, kind of holding firm there. Lafreniere's name has come up every once in a while. He hasn't traded him. I know there's going to be some people that hear that and say, by all means, trade Lafreniere, because he did struggle, obviously, for the majority of this past season, but he's made deals without giving up Lafreniere. Even some of the guys that are just getting started, Brant Othman, Gabe Perreault, Brett Berard, those guys are all here, and presumably, we'll see. When it comes to the Rangers handling prospects, you never know for sure. For all we know, maybe all three of those guys are either in the AHL or healthy scratches at the start of next season. In the AHL wouldn't be the worst thing for maybe some of them to get a little bit more seasoning, but they're all big parts of Ranger hockey going forward. They're all very young, and Drury has done everything that he's done without having to trade one of them. So, look, if the Rangers contend this upcoming season, hopefully Drury can work his magic at the trade deadline as well. So there is some good to come of this. The idea that you extend Drury and essentially reward him after everything that we've seen in the last calendar year, it just doesn't sit right with me. But you guys know what you think. I'd like to hear some thoughts on this entire matter. I'm sure, as far as I can gauge, it seems like most people do not like this, but there are some that are in favor of it. So I'd be curious to hear from both sides. We'll call it there. Thank you guys, as always, for tuning in, and I will see you next time.